Ever since its release, Megamind has been praised for its extremely subversive nature and satirical take on the superhero genre, from the hero being a bit of a jerk to the villain actually becoming the hero to the nerd that should become the hero becoming the villain instead. And that last point in particular has been the subject of praise by showing that nice guys and nerds aren't immediately entitled to the girl or actually always good people at heart. Only, I believe that analysis of Hal's character is actually a bit of a flawed one, which is what I want to address in this video. But first, even though I already gave a lot away, I would just like to warn you that there will be even more spoilers for this movie ahead. So in case you don't want anything else ruined, I would highly suggest you turn off the video and come back later. This will be your only spoiler warning. Okay, so to get right into it, the problem with the assessment most people give of Hal Stewart that I just paraphrased above is he's simply not a nerd, or a nice guy for that matter. And though I don't like giving real world commentaries in my videos, I just have to say I've never understood the bad rap nice guys get these days. Because if a guy wants favors just for treating a girl decently, then that doesn't make them nice. That makes them manipulative and entitled. An actual nice guy will treat somebody good and do nice things for them simply because they are nice and expect nothing in return for it, except maybe gratitude, and even that's debatable. And I don't really think it's fair for those two groups to be lumped together. But I'm getting off topic here. The point is, when it comes to Hal Stewart, I've noticed that everybody who talks about him always says the same thing, that from the very beginning, he comes across as a creep. And that's very important to note, that both Roxanne and the audience are unsettled by him from the start. And what's just as important to note is that there are various hints throughout the movie that he's not a very nice guy, which foreshadows his eventually becoming the villain. So, though at first glance he comes across as a typical nerd, and that his character is a deconstruction of one, in actuality he's the farthest thing from a nerd. And let me explain why that is. Now, to start off, I will only be addressing how stereotypical Hollywood nerds are portrayed in most movies, because in real life, people come in all shapes and sizes, so it's a lot harder to determine how groups of people would behave in any given situation, as real people can never be defined by stereotypes. So, with that being said, a typical Hollywood nerd is usually depicted as a nice person who doesn't fit in with everybody else, is too shy or intimidated to talk to the girl he likes, and happens to be very smart. Now, when it comes to the girl, usually she either just doesn't notice him or secretly does like him, but for whatever reason doesn't say anything. And then there are some times when she actually tries to tell him, and they just don't get the message for whatever reason. Now, it's important to note this as well, because in these cases, the writers are usually trying to show that it's his good heart and not anything else that came afterwards that she likes about him. Then the nerd, usually either through luck or his own smarts, does something that majorly boosts his confidence, and that's what finally allows him to stand up to his bullies and finally let the girl know how he feels about her. Now, if this summary seems overly familiar to you, it honestly should, because Hollywood uses that template in their movies all the time. Now, the reason the nerd is usually used in these types of movies is because they're the perfect underdog, and everybody loves a good underdog story. They're unpopular, insecure, and don't have many friends, so it's very easy to root for them. But what's just as important is that they are always portrayed as genuinely nice people. Their biggest sin might be that they want revenge on the people who bully them. And because everybody hates bullies, that's perfectly acceptable. And when it comes to the girl, they will always be very respectful, consider their feelings, and do nice things for them simply because they want to make them happy. Heck, most of the time these nerds are portrayed as not wanting to talk to the girl because they think she's too good for them. So my point is, unless written very poorly, the nerd never comes across as a creep to either the audience or the girl. And on the rare occasions when she does see him that way, it's usually made clear very quickly that it's because she's extremely judgmental and has a lesson to learn herself. Or that there's another girl who secretly has a crush on him and that he'll end up with her instead. Now, please do note that everything I just listed could and has worked just as easily with the genders reversed. And the only reason I explained it that way is because Hal Stewart is a man. And with that being said, Hal doesn't match that description at all. He continues to pursue Roxanne long after she's made it clear she's not interested, doesn't consider her feelings, as shown when he tries to ask her on a date so soon after the death of Metro Man, and is honestly really stupid. Seriously, quite possibly the only reason Megamind is able to defeat him is because he's so dumb. So when you really look at it, the only thing he even has in common with a nerd is that he's insecure. And even then it's because he keeps getting rejected rather than because he's afraid of being rejected like typical nerds are usually portrayed as. In all honesty, Hal actually has a lot more in common with the neckbeard stereotype than with Hollywood nerds. And just very quickly, for those of you who don't know, a neckbeard is typically a man, either in their teenage years or middle-aged, who isn't very attractive, obsessed with video games, usually lives with their parents in their basement, a complete slob, and a rather unpleasant person overall. And you have to admit, parents' basement aside, Hal actually fits this stereotype almost to a T. Video games are the only thing he's good at or understands. His apartment is not clean by any means and is shown to not be very pleasant, which is a major reason why he comes across as a creep. So, taking this into account, to say that Hal is a neckbeard that the movie first tries to disguise as a nerd would honestly be a more appropriate assessment of his character. Because again, in actuality, he has virtually nothing in common with a stereotypical Hollywood nerd, and it becomes obvious rather quickly at that. And once you understand that he has much more in common with neckbeards, it makes it a lot easier to see why he comes across the way he does, and why Roxanne has no interest in him. Now sure, some might still argue that in any other movie Hal would still have become the hero, and that might be true, but what happens to him in Megamind is much more in line with what a stereotypical neckbeard would end up doing if given superpowers than if a stereotypical Hollywood nerd was. And really, if anybody fits the stereotypical nerd molding in this movie, it's Megamind himself. Think about it. He's intelligent, he makes some really impressive inventions, and he's secretly insecure when it comes to the girl he has a crush on. Though, of course, the one difference is that he starts out as the bad guy, but even then he's shown to actually be a pretty nice person who simply believes he has to be the villain. Long story short, Megamind sees himself as much more of a video game villain than a real one, as it's even stated plainly later on in the movie when he tells Hal off for playing the game wrong. Heck, even when he takes over the city, he more just causes a nuisance rather than actually does anything evil. So my point here is, it's honestly Megamind, not Hal, who's really the nerd here. The movie even goes as far as to have him literally disguise himself as somebody else in order to get close to the girl he likes, which is something a lot of fictional and real nerds do or wish they could do when trying to get with their crush. And again, he reflects the insecurities often associated with nerds by flat out admitting that he never expected her to actually care about him. Now, sure, he does have in-story reasons for these actions and for feeling this way, but I still think the metaphor works pretty well. Because simply put, I think Megamind could even be seen as an analogy for how insecure people sometimes see themselves. They believe they are much worse than they are, hence why Megamind is the bad guy, but good at actual heart, and has to literally put on a disguise for his crush to like him back. But to get back to the nerd thing, a few other things he has in common with them is that he's most certainly the underdog, was bullied in school, has virtually no friends for most of the movie, and perhaps most importantly, always treats the girl with respect and does nice things for her simply because they make her happy. So, like I said, when you really look at it, saying that Hal is a deconstruction of nerds and nice guys doesn't really fit the bill, especially because he is, intentionally or not, a neckbeard stereotype played almost completely straight, and that Megamind himself seems to be, in many ways, modeled after Hollywood nerds, if with a few twists befitting a movie like this. Now, with all that being said, I guess this could open up a whole other discussion about how these stereotypes are used in movies and whether or not it's a good thing, but that's out of my field of expertise. So, with all that, all I'll really say is that Megamind is still a really good satire and subversion of the superhero genre, but one thing it isn't is a deconstruction of nerds through the character of Hal Stewart. Although you could argue that there is a hidden brilliance in the way the character is written, which is to say that Hal believes he's a nerd and underdog that will automatically get the girl in the end, but in actuality is a neckbeard that never admits his own faults and will never get the girl he dreams of because of it. And that aspect of his character, as I briefly touched on at the beginning, is something that happens all too often in real life. All right, I think that's everything I wanted to say on that. So now I want to hear what you think about this. Do you believe that Hal Stewart is a deconstruction of the Hollywood nerd and nice guy? Or do you believe he's actually meant to reflect people who just think they're nice but really aren't? Please let me know in the comments below. And remember, you don't have to agree with the argument I've just presented. You can feel any way about this subject that you want to. And lastly, thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you all next time.